The fact of the matter is, you can never acquit the death of a terrorist killed when carrying out murder. 54 years ago, no justice for my family, no justice for young Daniel McCormick. Their only crime was to wear the uniform of this nation. Is, will this bill help to bring healing or comfort? I doubt that, and the answer is no.
Stay with me because the full video I'm about to show you puts everything into a new perspective. Right, so picture this. It's another Tuesday in the House of Commons, the kind of day where MPs are shuffling papers, yawning into their sleeves and pretending to look interested while someone drones on about drainage infrastructure in the East Midlands. Perfectly normal, perfectly boring. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, everything stops. The air changes, and one man, Jim Shannon, a Northern Irish MP who most people outside of Westminster couldn't pick out of a lineup, stands up and begins to speak. And within minutes, the entire chamber, this cavernous, centuries-old room full of professional arguers and career cynics, goes completely, utterly silent. Now, if you've ever watched Prime Minister's Questions, you'll know that silence in the House of Commons is about as rare as a humble press release from a politician. So when it happens, you pay attention. And today, we are paying very close attention indeed. Before we get into the full story, let's set the scene properly because context is everything here. The debate was centred around legislation tied to the legacy of the Troubles, that deeply painful chapter of history involving Northern Ireland, acts of terrorism, the security forces, and decades of grief that still hasn't fully healed. Now, this is a topic that gets discussed in Parliament in that polished, detached, bureaucratic way that politicians have perfected. Lots of carefully worded phrases, lots of on the one hand and with the greatest respect. It rarely feels raw, it rarely feels real. That is, until Jim Shannon got to his feet. Real quick before we roll the footage, if you're enjoying this content, do me a huge favour. Hit that like button and smash subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. It's free for you and it helps us out more than you know. Already clicked? You're awesome. Let's get into the video.
I call
Deputy Speaker. Myself and my party, DUP, stand squarely.
You take an intervention? The Honourable Gentleman take an intervention? I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman taking an intervention, and I'm sure that what he's about to tell us will be very important, and I wonder if he would just take a deep breath and give us his counsel.
Jim Shannon.
Honourable Gentleman for the intervention. The door to justice must remain open. No equivalence can or should be drawn between the innocent victim and the perpetrators. Every family deserves a full and fair investigation into the death of their loved ones. The bill does not provide protection for service personnel. The recent history of members of the security forces being maligned and dragged through the courts as a result of vexatious allegations. Let us never forget these stem from an attempt to whitewash the history of the Troubles, which was overwhelming paramilitaries murdering and maiming at their unjustifiable will. The fact of the matter is, you can never acquit the death of a terrorist killed when carrying out murder.
For Gavin, he'll know the respect with which he's held in this chamber for raising attention to the matters of terrorist atrocities over many years, and on both sides of the House we're very keen to hear his story, so we just like him to take a moment and we'll look forward to hearing that.
Jim Shannon.
Honourable friend for that then. And the fact is, my cousin Kenneth Smith and his good friend Daniel McCormick were murdered on an ambush on their way to work on the 10th of December 71. 54 years ago, no justice for my family, no justice for young Daniel McCormick. Their only crime was to wear the uniform of this nation. Sure. So I'm going to finish with this. I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, for going on me, but I apologise for my tears. I find it very hard to express things on behalf of people that I serve with and you. So I'm asking the members in this House to ask themselves this: Will this legislation do what the Troubles legislation was intended for and provide justice? No, it won't. It will help my cousin Shelley and my family and all the other families in the family of Private Stephen Smart, that lovely young boy in the family I speak to down the street in Newton Ours. No, it won't. Will this legislation enable the continued persecution of RUC, UDR and British Army veterans, many of whom have had their honourable service doubted and their service disputed and who deserve better than this House? The question is, will this bill help to bring healing or comfort? I doubt that, and the answer is no, it will not, and therefore I believe tonight it must not pass.
Now, you have to understand who Jim Shannon is, because his reputation in the chamber is actually part of what makes this moment so extraordinary. The man is known, genuinely, warmly known, for his interventions. He is the MP who will pop up in almost any debate, on almost any subject, and find a way to connect it back to his constituents in Strangford. He's become something of a beloved parliamentary institution, the kind of figure that colleagues tease fondly and respect deeply at the same time. When another MP invited him to intervene during this particular debate, they did so with a gentle, almost affectionate nudge. "Take a deep breath," they said. "Give us your counsel." It was the kind of moment that suggested everyone in the room knew they were about to hear something that mattered, and they were right. Shannon stood and began making his case against the bill, arguing clearly and with conviction that the legislation, as written, would not deliver justice for the victims of terrorist atrocities. He made the point that no equivalence should ever be drawn between the innocent victim and the perpetrator, that families deserved full and fair investigations, that the bill, in his view, did not provide adequate protection for service personnel, those men and women who served in the security forces and who, in many cases, had seen their honourable service dragged through the courts on the basis of what he described as vexatious allegations. He was measured, he was articulate, and he was clearly speaking from a place of deep personal understanding of the subject. The chamber listened. But what came next was something none of them, and frankly none of us watching, were quite prepared for. Shannon paused, and then, in a voice that had shifted from parliamentary composure to something far more human and far more fragile, he told the House about his cousin, Kenneth Smith, and Kenneth's good friend Daniel McCormick, two men who were murdered in an ambush on their way to work on the 10th of December 1971, 54 years ago. He said those words, 54 years, and you could hear the weight of them. Their only crime, he said, was wearing the uniform of this nation. No justice for his family, no justice for the McCormicks, just grief, carried quietly across more than half a century, and now, finally, being spoken aloud in the highest chamber in the land. And at that point, Jim Shannon, this man who has stood in that chamber hundreds of times, who has asked more questions than perhaps any MP in modern history, who is known for his energy and his persistence and his warmth, Jim Shannon began to cry. He apologized to the Deputy Speaker for his tears. He said, with a rawness that was genuinely difficult to watch, that he found it very hard to express these things, that the people he served were in his heart and his mind, and he simply could not hold it together any longer. In a room that is built for performance and posturing and point-scoring, a man was simply, honestly, heartbreakingly human. And the chamber, to its credit, rose to meet him. What makes this moment so significant isn't just the emotion, though that alone would be enough to stop anyone in their tracks. It's what the emotion represents. Shannon wasn't crying for effect. He wasn't playing to the cameras or performing grief for political capital. He was a man who had carried the murder of his cousin for over 5 decades, who had watched his family live without justice for all that time, and who now stood in Parliament asking a very simple, very devastating question. Will this bill actually help? And his answer, delivered through tears, was no. No, it will not help his cousin's family. No, it will not help the family of Private Stephen Smart, a young soldier whose family Shannon speaks with, whose memory Shannon carries with him. No, it will not bring healing, and therefore, he said, it must not pass. Now, you can agree or disagree with Shannon's position on the legislation itself. That's entirely up to you, and it's a genuinely complex issue with perspectives worth hearing on all sides. But what you cannot dismiss, what you simply cannot argue with, is the humanity of that moment. In a political landscape that often feels like a theatre of the absurd, where debate is reduced to soundbites and scandal, where sincerity is treated with suspicion, where emotion is seen as weakness, Jim Shannon stood up and reminded everyone watching that behind every piece of legislation there are real people, real families, real wounds that never fully close. And the response in the chamber was telling. Members on both sides acknowledged the respect with which Shannon is held. The room gave him space. Nobody heckled. Nobody checked their phone. For just a few minutes, the House of Commons was exactly what it is supposed to be, a place where the weight of human experience is brought to bear on the decisions of the nation. Whether you think the bill should pass or not, whether you support this government or the opposition, you'd have to be made of stone not to feel something watching that speech. And that, more than any policy debate, is what we should be talking about. Because if we lose the ability to be moved by genuine grief in public life, we've lost something far more important than any vote.